The Arizona desert had not yet awakened. The sun was only a pale blush along the rim of the mountains, the world still half in shadow, half in dream. A coyote cried somewhere beyond the riverbed, and the sound echoed through the canyons like a sorrowful hymn. Ghost, the old Apache dog, lifted his head from the ashes of last night's fire. His ears twitched. Something in the wind carried a scent, faint, broken, but human. He rose slowly. His thick white fur dusted with sand and began to trot down the dry wash. His paws made no sound on the earth. Taza had been his master for nearly a decade, ever since the wars ended and the Apache scout turned his back on both armies, white and red alike. Together, man and dog lived in silence on the edge of the San Pedro Valley, far from any trail or town. Taza had sworn never to be part of another man's world, but Ghost had never stopped watching the desert as if waiting for something or someone to appear. This morning he found it. At the bend in the river where the water thinned into a trickle, Ghost stopped. The smell was stronger now. He whined softly and pawed at the sand. Beneath a cluster of willows lay a figure, still half covered in dust, her dress torn, her skin sunburned and bleeding. She was a woman. Ghost sniffed her hand and whimpered. She was alive, barely. Her lips were cracked, her breathing shallow. Flies buzzed at the corner of her mouth. The old dog nudged her arm and barked once, then again louder, turning his head toward the hills where his master lived. Taza heard him long before he saw him. No creature in the desert cried like that unless it meant death, or something close to it. Slinging his rifle over his shoulder, he descended the rocky slope, the dog's barks guiding him toward the river. When he reached the willow grove, he stopped cold. The sight before him pulled the air from his lungs. A white woman. Out here alone, she couldn't have been more than 25, maybe younger. Her hair, tangled and full of sand, was the color of pale wheat. Her hands were bloodied as if she'd crawled for miles. There was a bullet crease across her shoulder and dried blood along her ribs. Taza's jaw clenched. He'd seen her kind before, the settlers, the ranchers, the missionaries who called his people savages. But none of them looked like this, helpless, broken, and abandoned by the same desert that had taken everything from him. He knelt beside her and touched her throat. A pulse, faint but there. He should have left her. His people's laws were clear. A white woman brought nothing but trouble to an Apache man. Yet something in him rebelled against that thought. Maybe it was Ghost's pleading eyes. Maybe it was the memory of his mother's voice long ago, whispering that no one should die alone in the sand. He reached under her shoulder to lift her, and that's when he saw it. A silver chain around her neck, half hidden beneath her torn dress. He pulled it free. Hanging from it was a small oval locket, dented and tarnished from travel. The clasp came loose easily beneath his thumb. Inside was a photograph, old but clear. The man's face hit him like a knife. Captain James Carter. The name thundered in his mind. The soldier who had betrayed his people. The one whose false promise of peace had led to the ambush at Skeleton Ridge. Taza had lost his parents that day, his sister Allah, his tribe scattered to the wind. And now, here lay a woman with that man's face staring up from her locket. He flipped the locket over. A single word was engraved on the back, faint but unmistakable. Evelyn. Taza's hands trembled. His heart seemed to stop in his chest. The daughter of his enemy. The desert was silent again. Ghost pressed his head against Taza's knee, waiting for his master's choice. For a long moment, Taza stared down at the dying woman. Then, with a slow breath that tasted like dust and old grief, he lifted her into his arms. Whatever fate had brought her here, it was now tangled with his, and the desert, as always, would keep their secret. For now. Taza carried the woman through the canyon with Ghost trotting close behind. The air was heavy with the scent of mesquite, and the whisper of wind through the red rocks. Every few steps he glanced down at her pale face, trying to understand why his heart would not harden. She was light as dry grass, her breath shallow, her skin fever-warm beneath. His rough hands, when they reached his small dwelling, a hidden hut of adobe and timber pressed against the cliffside, he laid her on a bed of furs and covered her with a worn wool blanket. Ghost settled by her side, his amber eyes never leaving her. Taza knelt near the fire pit and poured water into a clay bowl. As he washed the blood from her arm, he found more wounds, small cuts, bruises, a deep gash across her shoulder. He worked in silence, his movements careful but unkind in his mind. Each time her lips trembled or she whimpered, He reminded himself. She is Carter's blood. That name was a wound that had never closed. Years ago, Taza had been a scout for the U.S. Army. Believing that service might save his people, he had trusted Captain James Carter, a man who spoke of peace and coexistence, who promised land, safety, and food for the Chiricahua. But peace had been a lie. When Carter rode into Skeleton Ridge with the soldiers, it was not to bring gifts but rifles. The memory burned behind Taza's eyes. His mother's scream, his father's body falling in the dust, his sister Allah dragged away by soldiers and never seen again. That day the fire in him had died. He stared at the woman on his bed now and felt the old anger rise again. She was the living echo of that betrayal. If she died, perhaps the circle would close, the past would rest. But Ghost refused to move. The dog whimpered softly, licking the woman's hand, his loyalty defying Taza's bitterness. Taza spoke to him in Apache. She carries his blood. You know what that means? Ghost only looked up at him, silent, steady. The same look he had given Taza when he'd once thought of ending his own life after the war. It was a look that said, "No soul should die alone." He sighed. "You ask too much of me, old friend." Taza lit the fire, boiled water, and ground herbs he had gathered from the canyon, the roots of desert sage, the bark of the mescal tree, and the powder of red clay. He cleaned her wound with the bitter-smelling mixture. She stirred and moaned. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes like green glass washed in tears. "Don't leave me," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Taza froze. Her words struck a chord deep inside him. So familiar it hurt. Allah had said the same thing that night before the soldiers came. "Don't leave me." He clenched his jaw and looked away, stirring the fire until sparks jumped into the air. When he finally looked back, she was unconscious again. He examined the locket once more in the firelight. The engraving, Evelyn, glinted faintly. Beneath Carter's portrait was another photograph, almost hidden under the first. Taza pulled it free. The air left his chest. It was a picture of a young Apache woman, her dark hair braided with shells, her smile soft and shy. Allah, his sister, the same sister he had buried in his dreams 100 times. Taza's hands shook. Why would this woman, Carter's daughter, carry a photograph of Allah? The thought twisted in his mind like a thorn. Was she mocking him? Or was she a messenger from the past, come to uncover something he was never meant to know? Outside, thunder rolled across the distant mountains, though no storm had yet formed. It felt like a warning from the spirits, his ancestors watching from the canyon walls. Taza sat beside the dying woman, torn between the ghosts of his blood and the fragile life before him. If he saved her, he risked reopening wounds that should have stayed buried. If he let her die, he might never know why his sister's face lived inside her locket. And so, as the storm gathered over the desert, Taza whispered a single prayer to the fire. If this is a test, Great Spirit, let me be strong enough to bear the truth. The flames flickered and Ghost lifted his head to the wind. Somewhere beyond the canyon, the past began to stir. By the second morning, the desert sun had climbed high, spreading its merciless heat over the canyon. The wind carried the scent of dust and sage, and Taza's small fire smoked weakly beneath the rock overhang. The woman still slept, though at times her body trembled, her lips murmuring things he could barely understand. Taza had given her water, spoonful by spoonful, through the night. He had cooled her fever with wet cloths, tended her wounds, and fed her tiny sips of broth made from rabbit and herbs. He worked with the precision of a warrior tending his own. Yet every act of mercy was a battle against the hatred that simmered inside him. Each time he looked at her, he saw him, Captain James Carter, the man who had smiled at him once across a campfire and said, "You're one of the good ones, Taza." That memory still burned like a coal in his chest. Carter had pretended to see him as a friend, but he had been the one who led the soldiers to Skeleton Ridge. He had painted peace with honeyed words and washed it away in blood. And now his daughter lay beneath Taza's roof, breathing his air, kept alive by his hands. Taza rose to his feet and went outside. He needed the open sky, the silence of the desert. Ghost followed him, tail low, sensing the storm in his master's heart. Taza walked to the edge of the canyon where the red cliffs opened toward the valley below. He could see for miles, the distant cottonwoods by the river, the shimmer of heat over the sand, the wild horses grazing among the mesquite. For a moment, he closed his eyes and listened to the land, the one thing that had never betrayed him. The desert spoke in silence, reminding him who he was, not a scout, not a soldier, but an Apache. A man of the earth, bound to its laws of balance. He heard his mother's voice in memory, soft as wind through the reeds. When hatred grows too deep, it blinds the eyes to mercy. Both must live in the same heart, or the heart will die. He had not thought of her words in years, but now they returned like water from a forgotten spring. Taza turned back toward the hut. Inside, the woman had stirred. Her eyes were half open, glassy with fever. She struggled to sit up, whispering something that sounded like, "Please, my brother." Her hand reached out blindly into the air until it touched Ghost's fur. The dog leaned close, whining softly. Taza stepped into the doorway, his shadow falling across her. Her gaze flicked toward him, unfocused, filled with confusion and fear. Where am I?" she breathed. "You are alive," he said flatly. "That is enough," she blinked, trying to see him clearly. "You saved me." He said nothing. He turned to the pot and ladled out a small bowl of broth. "Drink," he ordered. Her hands trembled as she took it. When she sipped, she winced but swallowed. Then her eyes, green as the desert sage after rain, met his. Why? That single word hit him harder than any bullet. He could have told her the truth, that he didn't know. That the only reason she still breathed was because his dog refused to let her die. But instead he said, "The desert kills enough without my help." She gave a weak smile. "Then I owe the desert my thanks." Her voice, though frail, carried a warmth that unsettled him. It reminded him of his sister's laughter, of a time before betrayal, before hate. Taza turned away. "Rest," he said. "We will speak when your strength returns." As he stepped outside again, Ghost stayed behind, curling beside the woman. The sight made something twist painfully in Taza's chest. The dog who trusted no one but him had chosen her. That night he sat by the fire, watching the flames rise and fall. The locket lay in his palm again, glinting in the light. His eyes lingered on the two faces inside, his enemy and his sister, bound together by mystery and fate. He whispered to the night, "What are you, Evelyn Carter? A curse or the answer to everything I lost?" Above him the stars offered no reply. Only the same cold silence of the desert. Yet deep in that silence a change had begun. The faint stirring of something fragile and dangerous, something that felt like mercy. Night fell heavy over the canyon, wrapping the world in a silence so deep that even the crickets dared not sing. The fire in Taza's hut burned low, its orange glow flickering over the walls of mud and stone. The woman, Evelyn Carter, slept restlessly, her fever breaking into fits of murmured dreams. Her words came in fragments. "Father, don't go." The fire, Allah, that name again. Allah. Taza sat frozen in the shadows, his dark eyes fixed on her trembling lips. It wasn't possible. No white woman should have known that name. Allah had been his sister, bright as dawn, gentle as a stream, and she'd been gone for 10 long years. The soldiers had taken her the day Skeleton Ridge burned. He had searched for her body, found nothing but her beaded bracelet broken in the dirt. Now, hearing her name whispered by Carter's daughter felt like a curse come alive. He turned the locket over in his hands again, tracing the tiny scratches with his thumb. It was old, beaten from the desert, but it held two faces joined by something even the wind couldn't erase: his sister and his enemy. The questions clawed at him. How had Evelyn come to possess it? Why had her father carried a photo of Allah? The desert had many secrets, but this one was personal. When dawn broke, Evelyn stirred and opened her eyes. They were clearer now, though weak, like glass that had just been washed of dust. She looked around the small hut, confusion softening into fear when she saw Taza watching her. "You," she whispered. "You're Apache." He said nothing. He simply nodded once. She swallowed hard, her hand clutching the blanket to her chest. "You saved me. I remember. The river and your dog." Her gaze drifted toward Ghost, who lay nearby with his head on his paws. "If you hadn't found me, you would be bones by now," he said flatly. Her eyes flickered with something between gratitude and sorrow. "Then I owe you my life." Taza didn't reply. He reached into his vest and pulled out the locket, holding it out between them. The firelight glinted off the metal. "This," he said quietly. "Why do you carry it?" Her breath caught. You opened it. Yes. She took the locket with trembling fingers, her eyes lowering to the photographs. My father's, she murmured. It was all I had of him. And the woman? Evelyn hesitated, confusion shadowing her face. That's what I was trying to find out. My father never spoke of her. After he died, I found letters, unfinished ones, talking about someone named Allah. He said he owed her his life, and that one day he would make it right. I thought maybe she was a woman he loved once, long ago. Taza's jaw tightened. He loved no one, he said, bitterness creeping into his voice. He brought only death. Her eyes widened at the hatred in his tone. You knew him? He turned away. I knew what he did. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire popped softly, and Ghost's breathing filled the silence. Evelyn finally broke it, her voice faint but steady. Then maybe you can tell me what I never knew. I came west to learn the truth about him. Everyone said he was a hero. But in his last days, he wrote things that sounded like confession. He spoke of the Chiricahua, of a man he betrayed. He said he still saw the faces of the ones he'd wronged. Her words struck like thunder in Taza's chest. He rose to his feet, pacing the narrow space. He remembered, he said bitterly. But too late. Your father's truth is buried beneath bones. I didn't come to defend him, she said softly. I came to face what he did, to see it for myself. He stopped, turning toward her. And now you have. She met his eyes without flinching. Then tell me what he did. The question lingered between them like a blade. Taza wanted to turn away, to let her ignorance remain her shelter. But her eyes, those green, searching eyes, pulled at something deep inside him. He sat down across from her, his face lit by firelight. At Skeleton Ridge, he began slowly. Your father promised peace. He brought food, blankets, words of safety. But his soldiers came behind him with rifles. When they were done, only smoke and blood remained. My people scattered. My sister was taken. Her name was Allah. Evelyn's face went pale. Her lips parted in disbelief. Allah, she whispered. Then the woman in the locket, she's your sister. Taza nodded once. She was. Evelyn looked down at the locket in her palm, her tears falling silently. Then my father lied to me all my life. The fire crackled between them, each spark rising like a memory that refused to die. Outside, the desert wind began to howl again, carrying with it the ghosts of Skeleton Ridge, and the first whisper of something that neither hatred nor mercy could silence. The truth. The storm passed in the night, leaving the canyon washed clean beneath the golden Arizona dawn. Water still dripped from the rocks, and the scent of wet mesquite hung in the air. Inside the hut, Evelyn Carter stirred at last, this time not from fever or pain, but from the faint warmth of morning sunlight falling across her face. Her eyelids fluttered open, blinking against the light. For a long moment she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was made of rough-hewn logs, smoke-stained and low. The air smelled of herbs, ash, and animal hide. Her body ached in places she didn't remember hurting before. Then the memory returned in a rush. The ambush on the stagecoach, the gunfire, the fall into the ravine. And the man. The Apache with eyes like carved stone. She turned her head slightly and found him by the fire, silent, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. His dark hair fell loose over his shoulders, his skin burnished bronze by the desert sun. Every movement carried a quiet strength. And near him, curled in the shadows, the white dog, Ghost, watched her with the same calm patience as before. When Evelyn tried to sit up, pain shot through her shoulder. She gasped, clutching the blanket. The sound made the man look up. You should not move yet, he said, his voice deep and steady, touched with an accent that rolled like the desert wind. Evelyn froze, heart pounding. You speak English. I learned it, he said simply. Once. Her eyes searched his face. You saved me. He didn't answer right away. He set the knife down, rose to his full height, and crossed the room. She felt small beneath his gaze, like he could see straight through her. You were half dead, he said. The river kept you alive. And you? A flicker of something crossed his eyes. Perhaps I was foolish. Despite her fear, a faint smile touched her lips. Then I owe your foolishness my life. Taza, she still didn't know his name yet, turned away and ladled broth from a pot over the fire. Drink, he said. You must be strong if you wish to travel. Evelyn accepted the bowl, though her hands shook slightly. The broth was bitter, smoky, but it warmed her from within. She took slow sips, watching him over the rim of the bowl. Everything about him was wild and untamed, but there was no cruelty in his eyes. Only silence, an old kind of silence that came from carrying too many ghosts. Where am I?" she asked after a moment. "In Apache land," he said, "far from your people." "Then I should thank you twice for saving me and for not leaving me to die in it." His jaw tightened. "Do not thank me yet." Evelyn frowned slightly. "You talk as though my being alive is a burden." He didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his vest and pulled something from his pocket, the locket. He held it up, the chain dangling, the metal glinting in the firelight. Her breath caught. "That's mine. I found it around your neck," he said. "It carries faces that do not belong together." Evelyn swallowed hard. "My father's and a woman I don't know. Her name was Allah," he said, his voice low, sharp as a blade. "She was my sister." Her heart stopped. "Your sister?" He nodded once, his eyes burning into hers. "And your father was the man who destroyed my people." Evelyn's fingers trembled against the bowl. "No," she whispered. "That can't be true. You think I lie?" "I think—" Her voice broke. "I think my father wasn't the man I believed him to be. I came west to learn the truth, but I never imagined—" She trailed off, unable to meet his gaze. The silence that followed was heavy as stone. The fire popped softly between them, the only sound in the hut. Finally, she looked up again. "If what you say is true, then I owe you more than I can ever repay, for saving me, when you should have let me die." Taza's expression didn't change, but his voice grew softer, almost reluctant. "The desert chose to spare you, not I." Evelyn smiled faintly through her tears. "Then I'll thank the desert." Ghost lifted his head and nudged Taza's leg, as if reminding him of something unspoken. Taza glanced toward the canyon's mouth, where sunlight spilled like molten gold. He didn't know why he had saved her, or why, when he looked at her now, he saw not Carter's blood, but something different. Something that frightened him more than hate ever had. She was still weak, still a stranger. But deep inside, Taza felt it, the first crack in the armor of vengeance he'd carried all his life. And through that crack, mercy, warm, dangerous, and unstoppable, had begun to seep in. The days that followed passed like a dream caught between two worlds, half shadow, half sunlight. Evelyn healed slowly beneath Taza's watch, her strength returning one day at a time. The fever faded, her wounds closed, and color returned to her face. Yet even as her body mended, her heart carried the weight of everything she had learned. Each morning, she woke to the hush of the canyon, the sound of wind whispering through the rocks, the smell of smoke and sage. Taza was always awake before her, silent, watchful, tending the fire or sharpening his blade. He spoke little, his words measured and careful, but his actions were steady and kind. Evelyn learned his name one dawn when Ghost nudged her awake, his cold nose against her hand. She had whispered, Where's your master?" And from behind her a calm voice had answered, "Taza," that was all. But from that moment, the name carried weight in her mind, like something carved into stone. By the third morning she could stand again, though the movement brought pain to her shoulder. When she stepped outside the hut for the first time, she gasped. The canyon stretched before her in colors she had never imagined. Red cliffs rising into the sky, streaked with gold and white. The desert beyond shimmering like an endless sea. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Taza stood a few steps behind her. "It is cruel," he said. "The desert hides nothing. It gives and takes what it wants." She turned to face him. "And yet you live here." "I belong to it," he said simply. Their eyes met for a moment, and something passed between them, a quiet understanding neither dared name. That evening, as the sun sank low, Evelyn sat by the fire, her hands trembling as she held the locket. "I still can't understand why my father had her picture," she said. "Your sister, Allah." Taza's eyes remained on the fire. "Maybe he took it from her when she died. Or maybe," Evelyn said softly, "he didn't kill her." He turned to her sharply. "You think to wash his hands clean?" "No," she said, meeting his anger without fear. "I think maybe there's more to this story than either of us knows." He said nothing, but the muscle in his jaw flexed. He wanted to hate her words, but something deep inside whispered that she might be right. That night, sleep eluded them both. The following morning, Evelyn said quietly, "I need to go to Tucson." My brother is there, a missionary. He might know what father never told me. Taza's expression darkened. The roads are not safe. Bandits, soldiers, worse. I have to try. She looked fragile yet determined, her green eyes burning with purpose. Taza felt a pull inside him, one part anger, one part admiration. He could let her go, but something told him she wouldn't last a day alone. Finally, he said, "Then I will take you." Evelyn blinked in surprise. "You'd do that for me?" His voice was low. "Not for you. For the answers I still need." And so the fragile truce began. They left at dawn, Ghost leading the way along the narrow canyon trail. Evelyn rode a small Mustang Taza had captured and tamed himself, while he rode beside her on a black stallion that moved like smoke. The silence between them was heavy but not hostile. She watched how he moved, alert, graceful, part of the land itself. He taught her how to guide her horse with her knees, how to find water by following the birds, how to wrap her shawl to keep the desert sun from burning her skin. At first, she thought he was merely being practical, but slowly she realized these were lessons of care, not duty. He was teaching her to survive. In return, Evelyn began to talk, her voice filling the long, quiet stretches of the trail. She spoke of her childhood in Virginia, her mother who had died when she was young, her father's obsession with the West and his guilt that had followed him to the grave. She spoke, and Taza listened, not with answers, but with the quiet respect of a man who understood pain that had no cure. One night, as they camped beneath a canopy of stars, she said softly, "I used to think the desert was empty, but now I see it's full of everything people forget to look for." Taza gazed at her across the fire. "The desert shows truth," he said. "Even when it hurts," Evelyn smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's why I came here." The firelight flickered across her face, catching the tears she didn't try to hide. Taza looked away quickly, afraid that if he met her eyes too long, the fragile truce between them might turn into something else, something neither could survive. For now, the trail ahead was long, and both carried ghosts they were not yet ready to face. 3 days into their journey, the land began to change. The cliffs fell away into open plains of dry grass, the air heavy with heat and dust. Crows circled above them in slow, lazy arcs. The road to Tucson wound through a narrow valley, silent but too silent for Taza's liking. He rode ahead of Evelyn, scanning the horizon. His instincts whispered danger. The air felt wrong, the wind still. Ghost trotted close beside Evelyn's Mustang, his ears twitching, tail stiff. "Taza," she called softly. "Something's wrong, isn't it?" He didn't answer at first. Then in a low voice he said, "Keep your eyes forward. Do not stop." Her heart tightened. She did as he said, her fingers gripping the reins tighter. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but now every shadow looked like movement, every rock a crouched figure. And then, gunfire. The sound cracked across the plain like thunder. Evelyn's horse reared, screaming. She clung to the saddle, but a second shot whizzed past her ear, and terror jolted through her chest. Bandits, at least 6 of them, emerged from the rocks, faces covered with red scarves, guns flashing in the sunlight. Taza shouted something in Apache and wheeled his stallion around. His rifle was in his hands in a blink. The first shot dropped one bandit from his horse. Ghost lunged toward another, his white fur flashing like lightning as he tore into the man's leg. "Ride, Evelyn," Taza roared, but she didn't. Not far enough, not fast enough. A bandit grabbed her reins, yanking her down. She hit the ground hard, the air knocked from her lungs. The man laughed, his pistol gleaming as he leaned over her. Before he could fire, Taza was there. He swung down from his horse, his knife flashing. The bandit's scream was brief and ugly. The others fired wildly, bullets spraying dust around them. Evelyn scrambled behind a boulder, her heart hammering in her chest. "Taza," she cried. He fought like the desert itself, silent, deadly, unstoppable. But there were too many. One bullet grazed his ribs, another tore into his arm. He staggered but stayed standing, firing back until the last of the bandits broke and fled into the rocks. Silence returned, broken only by Ghost's growls and Evelyn's ragged breathing. Evelyn ran to him. "You're bleeding," she said, dropping to her knees beside him. "It is nothing," he grunted, pressing a hand to his side, but the blood kept coming dark and thick between his fingers. "Nothing," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved my life again and you call it nothing?" He tried to speak but swayed instead. Evelyn caught him, guiding him to the ground. She tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against his wound. He hissed in pain but didn't pull away. "Hold still," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You've lost too much already. You're not losing this too." Taza looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment the desert disappeared. Her face hovered above him, streaked with dust and tears but radiant in the fading light. "You should have left when I told you," he murmured. "And let you die?" she said. "Never." His eyes softened, the hard lines of his face breaking for the first time. "You are your father's blood," he said quietly, "but not his heart." She smiled faintly, brushing the hair from his brow. "Maybe I came west to find the part of him that was missing." He closed his eyes, the weight of exhaustion pulling him under. Ghost lay beside him, guarding his master like a shadow. Evelyn worked through the night, cleaning his wound, binding it as best she could, whispering prayers she hadn't said since she was a child. When dawn came, the desert was still again, quiet, washed in gold. Taza stirred weakly and Evelyn helped him sit up. "You should rest," she said. He shook his head. "We cannot stay here. They will return." "Then I'll help you ride," she said. "We'll find a safe place." He looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes full of something unspoken. "You are not like the others," he said softly. "You listen to the desert." Evelyn smiled faintly, exhaustion in her voice. "Maybe because it's the only thing that ever told me the truth." And as they rode away side by side through the early light, the blood-stained sand behind them glowed like fire, marking the place where vengeance had begun to crumble, and something far more fragile, far more dangerous, had taken its place. By the time they reached Tucson, the town was nothing like Evelyn remembered. Dust hung thick in the air and the streets buzzed with soldiers, merchants, and weary travelers. The war between settlers and the Apache had left its mark, burned out homes, posters offering bounties for hostiles, and whispers that peace was just a lie people told themselves at night. Evelyn dismounted carefully, her legs trembling from days of travel. Taza followed behind her, his wounds wrapped but still raw beneath his shirt. He didn't complain. He never did. Ghost padded silently at his side, earning wary glances from the townsfolk who couldn't decide whether the huge white dog was a friend or a threat. They stopped in front of a small mission church near the edge of town. Bells chimed softly from its tower. The air smelled faintly of sage and candle wax. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "This is where my brother Samuel works," she said, her voice unsteady. "If anyone knows the truth about Father, it's him." Taza gave a single nod but didn't move to follow her inside. "Go," he said quietly. "I will wait here." She hesitated. "He's not like Father. He'll understand." Taza's eyes were unreadable. "We will see." Evelyn stepped inside the mission. The light was dim, filtered through colored glass, and her footsteps echoed softly on the worn wooden floor. At the altar, a man in a black coat turned as she entered. His face broke into shock, then joy. "Evelyn?" "Samuel." He crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her into a tight embrace. "By God, I thought you were dead. We heard nothing after your stage vanished. What happened to you?" "It's a long story," she said, pulling back to study him. His face was thinner, older than she remembered, his eyes tired but kind. "Samuel, I need answers." "About Father." His expression faltered. "What about him?" Evelyn took out the locket and opened it. Inside was the tiny portrait of the Apache woman, Allah. "Who is she?" she whispered. Samuel's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" "Father had it," she said. "And the man who saved me, he says she was his sister. His name is Taza. He believes Father killed her." Samuel turned away, his hands trembling. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "Father didn't kill her. He tried to save her." Evelyn's breath caught. "Save her?" "She was wounded," Samuel said. "Allah came to our settlement after a raid, alone, terrified. Father took her in, hid her from the soldiers, but when the others found out, they called her a spy. They were going to hang her. Father helped her escape into the desert. He said he'd bring her food the next night." His voice cracked, but he never came back. A fever took him before he could. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. "Then Taza's hatred built on a lie," Samuel said softly. "And maybe on grief too. He lost a sister. We lost a father. But no one told the truth because it was easier to hate." Outside, the door creaked open. Taza stood there silent. He had heard everything. Evelyn's heart twisted as she saw the storm in his eyes, pain, disbelief, something like relief. "It cannot be," he whispered. "She died alone." "I buried her myself," Samuel stepped forward. "She might not have died if not for our people's fear. My father tried to do right by her, but he was only one man." For a moment Taza said nothing. Then in a low voice he said, "Your father carried her spirit longer than I knew. He was brave." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Taza, now you know the truth. The hate doesn't have to live anymore," he turned to her. "Hate is easy to bury, but grief, it never leaves." Samuel looked between them, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You've both lost too much to keep living in the past." Outside, the bells began to toll for evening mass. Their sound soft and sorrowful. Evelyn stepped closer to Taza. "Then maybe it's time we stopped running from it," she said. Taza's gaze softened, the fire in him dimming just enough to let something gentler through. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But first we must return to where it began, to her grave." Evelyn nodded, her fingers brushing his hand for the briefest moment. And as they stepped out of the mission together, the setting sun cast their shadows long across the dirt street. Two souls bound not by vengeance anymore, but by the fragile hope of healing what the desert had broken. The journey back to the canyon felt heavier than before. Each mile seemed to carry the weight of generations, of lies, grief, and love buried beneath red stone and sand. Evelyn rode beside Taza in silence, her heart tight with all that had been revealed. The truth had freed them from hatred, yet it had also bound them closer in a way neither could name. When they reached the rim of the canyon, the wind greeted them first, hot, dry, restless. It whistled through the rocks like a spirit sighing. Taza dismounted, standing tall against the setting sun. For the first time since she had met him, Evelyn saw not a warrior, not a savior, but a man stripped bare by sorrow and memory. "She is here," he said quietly, walking toward a small rise near the mouth of the canyon. Evelyn followed, her steps careful, reverent. The grave was simple, a ring of stones and a faded necklace hanging from a small wooden cross. Ghost stopped beside it, sitting solemnly, his golden eyes watching in silence. Taza knelt, his hand brushing over the dust. "Allah," he whispered in Apache, the name breaking softly on his tongue. "Your brother comes with truth." Evelyn's eyes burned as she knelt beside him. "Your sister was brave," she said gently. "And your father, he was too. They were caught between worlds neither understood." He nodded, his jaw tight. "I hated your blood for so long. I thought all who came from your kind carried only death. But his voice faltered. He saved what he could." Evelyn reached into her pocket and drew out the locket. For a long moment she stared at it, then set it gently atop the stones. The silver glinted faintly in the dying light. "She can rest now," Evelyn whispered. Taza's eyes met hers, dark, searching, raw. "And what of you?" he asked softly. "Will you rest now that the truth is done?" Evelyn shook her head. "Truth doesn't heal what was broken, but it helps us stop breaking more." They sat there in silence as the sun sank behind the cliffs. The sky flared crimson, gold, and violet, painting the canyon in living fire. Wind stirred Evelyn's hair, carrying with it the scent of sage and rain. When the first stars appeared, Taza spoke again. "You could go east. Return to your brother, to your people." She turned toward him, her eyes shining. "And leave the one who saved me? The one who taught me how to listen to the desert?" Taza's brow furrowed. "You do not belong here. Your world is beyond these stones." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Maybe I don't belong anywhere, but here I'm not running from ghosts anymore." He looked away, his breath heavy. "You don't know what it means to stay among us, to be bound to my people." "Then teach me," she said quietly. He froze. The wind died for a moment, as if the desert itself were listening. Evelyn rose to her feet, standing before him, her face pale in the moonlight. "You told me the desert shows truth, even when it hurts. Well, here's mine. I don't want to leave you, Taza. Not after everything we've lost. Maybe we can start again, together." Taza stood slowly. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something fierce and fragile all at once. He stepped closer, close enough for her to hear the uneven rhythm of his breath. "You speak as if love can erase death," he murmured. "No," she said softly, "but maybe it can give us something worth living for." He looked at her for a long, trembling moment, then reached out and brushed the back of his fingers against her cheek. It was a hesitant touch, reverent, as though he feared she might disappear. "You are fire and water," he whispered. "Everything that does not belong, and yet everything the desert needs." Her breath caught, tears shining in her lashes. "Then let me stay." Taza took a deep breath, looking past her to the stars scattered across the endless black. "If you stay," he said slowly, "you must live as one of us. Work as we work, grieve as we grieve, and love not as the white world loves, but as the desert does, without promise, without end." Evelyn smiled faintly, her voice trembling. "Then I'll learn." He nodded once solemnly, then took her hand. Together they stood over the grave of his sister and her father's redemption, the past finally laid to rest. Above them, the canyon echoed with the faint call of a nightbird. The desert, in all its silence and sorrow, seemed to breathe again, and for the first time since their fates had collided, Taza felt the weight in his chest ease, not gone, but gentler. Beside him, Evelyn's hand was warm. Real. The dead were at peace. The living, perhaps, could be too. Months passed and the seasons turned across the canyon. The winds that once carried the sound of morning now brought laughter, the smell of cooking fires and the rhythmic beat of drums echoing through the rocks. The Apache camp had accepted Evelyn slowly, warily at first, this pale woman who spoke their tongue with a soft accent and carried sorrow in her eyes. But over time, they saw her differently. She fetched water from the spring, learned to grind corn by hand, and tended to the elders with the gentle patience of one who had known great loss. The women called her Chidi Zomo, bird woman, because she sang to herself while she worked, her voice clear and low like a mourning dove. Taza watched her often from a distance, his heart caught in a struggle he could not name. She had become part of his world, yet never quite of it. She was light in a land of red stone and shadow, a reminder that even in the harshest place, beauty could take root. One evening, under the fading orange sky, he found her sitting beside the riverbed, her feet in the cool water, Ghost lying beside her. She was weaving a small pouch from leather strips, her fingers deft and sure. "You're quiet tonight," she said without looking up. "The desert listens when it sleeps," he replied. "So should we," she smiled faintly. "And what does it hear?" He crouched beside her. "Footsteps, of those who once walked here and never left." Evelyn's gaze softened. "Like Allah and your father," he said. "Their spirits walk the same trail now." For a long while neither spoke. The night grew deep around them, the sky alive with stars. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder and he didn't move away. "Taza," she whispered. "When I first came here, I thought the desert was death. Now I see its life, hard but honest." He turned to her, his eyes dark pools in the starlight. "You learned what few ever do. The desert keeps its own, and now it keeps you." Her breath caught. "Are you saying you want me to stay?" He hesitated, then reached out, taking her hand. His voice was low, rough as stone. "You have already stayed, Evelyn. The wind does not ask the leaf if it wishes to rest, it simply carries it where it belongs." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but they were not from sadness. "Then I belong here with you." He smiled then, a rare, quiet thing that broke through years of guarded silence. "Then with me you stay." Ghost barked once as if in approval, and the moment broke into soft laughter. Weeks later they returned once more to Allah's grave. The air was calm, the morning bright. Evelyn carried a small pouch of wildflowers she had gathered at the river bank, yellow blooms that grew despite the sand and heat. She knelt and placed them gently among the stones. Taza stood behind her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "She would have liked you," he said. "You remind me of her spirit, quiet but unbreakable." Evelyn smiled. "And your sister reminds me of what my father must have seen, the courage to love across lines that others built from fear." They stood there in silence, the canyon wind curling around them like a blessing. Years would pass and stories would grow. Travelers who crossed the desert sometimes spoke of an Apache warrior and his white-skinned wife who lived deep in the canyons with their loyal white dog. They said she sang to the stars at night, and that the wind carried her song for miles. They said the warrior was fierce in battle but gentle at heart, and that he always carried a silver locket around his neck, a token of two souls who had once been enemies, bound forever by truth. And sometimes, on the stillest nights, When the moon hung over the cliffs, those who listened closely swore they could hear it. The echo of a woman's voice carried on the wind, soft and full of peace. The desert shows truth, even when it hurts. Her words lived on, whispered through generations. As the canyon held their story, the story of a woman who came to die and a man who came to hate, and how both learned that even in a land of ghosts, love could still be born because the desert, cruel and beautiful, does not forget, it keeps its own.